Dead men tell no tales, but their ships speak volumes. Welcome to the Cursed Compass, where we explore the darkest maritime mysteries. For a ship to sink to the ocean floor is a tragedy. For the exact same steel hull to sink to the ocean floor 4 separate times across a span of 61 years is a statistical and engineering anomaly. If you search for the name Admiral Nakhimov today, you'll likely find stories of an armored cruiser from the 1905 Imperial Russian Navy, scuttled during the Battle of Tsushima and surrounded by persistent, unverified legends of lost gold. The ship we are examining has no connection to those legends. The true subject of this anomaly is Hull 614. Built in 1925, she began life as the German luxury liner SS Berlin. Decades later, she would meet her ultimate end under a Soviet flag. That final disaster occurred in the late summer of 1986. A catastrophic blackout plunged the vessel into total darkness, and the ship sank in exactly 7 minutes, taking 423 lives with it. Massive ocean liners do not typically disappear in 7 minutes. To understand how a structural failure of that speed is physically possible, we have to forensically track the compromises made to this hull across its entire 6-decade operational lifespan. When the SS Berlin left the Bremer-Vulkan shipyard in 1925, she was an imposing 15,000-ton vessel. Designed for the North German Lloyd Line, she operated the Bremen to New York route with a robust safety profile for the punishing North Atlantic. By July 1939, her commercial life ended. The Kriegsmarine requisitioned the vessel, outfitting her with 400 beds to serve as military hospital ship Lazarettschiff A. As the Eastern Front collapsed in January 1945, the ship was drafted into Operation Hannibal to transport desperate military personnel and civilian refugees out of the Baltic under freezing conditions. On January 31st, while forming a convoy off the coast of Swinemund, the ship struck a naval mine. This was sinking number 1. The blast crippled the vessel, forcing an emergency tow. She never made it. While under tow, the hull struck a second mine. Taking on water rapidly, the crew intentionally beached the ship in the shallows to prevent a total loss. Stripped of usable equipment and abandoned by early February, the ship was left half-submerged in the Baltic mud. The twin mine strikes left the hull severely compromised, creating a deeply hazardous starting point for the vessel's post-war resurrection. Following the war, the wreck was claimed by the Soviet Union as reparations. In 1946, the Baltic Fleet's Emergency Rescue Service initiated a massive salvage operation, sealing the underwater compartments and using heavy industrial pumps to push water out of the hull. Sinking number 3 happened at the moment of triumphs. On New Year's Eve 1947, as the bow finally broke the surface, a German booby trap left inside the ship detonated. The explosion instantly reversed the salvage progress, sending the ship crashing back to the bottom. A diver named Timofey Starchenko was underneath the hull plugging a leak when the explosion hit. The massive weight of the ship pressed him directly into the mud. He survived only because his rigid copper diving helmet took the immense structural load until a rescue team could dig him out. The Soviets eventually raised the ship on their second attempt and sent her in for major repairs. She was officially rebranded the Admiral Nakhimov, named after a 19th-century naval commander, and her total volume was expanded to over 17,000 tons. This cross-section shows the fatal engineering choice made during the refit. To create a more spacious layout, shipyard workers systematically removed several of the ship's original watertight bulkheads. In naval architecture, bulkheads are the primary defense against sinking. By removing them, the mathematics of the hull changed. The original German design could survive multiple breaches. The Nakhimov could now only stay afloat if a single compartment flooded. If 2 compartments filled with water, the ship would rapidly go down. When she entered passenger service in 1957, the Nakhimov was operating on borrowed time. She carried an average of 1,000 people per voyage, entirely dependent on a hull that had lost its standard maritime safety margins. At 10 p.m. on August 31, 1986, the Admiral Nakhimov departed the port of Novorossiysk. Under the command of Captain Vadim Markov, the ship carried 1,234 passengers and crew, heading south towards Sochi. This radar recreation maps the first few minutes of the voyage. The port pilot noticed an inbound vessel on a direct collision course, the Pyotr Vasyov, an 18,000-ton bulk carrier heavily loaded with Canadian grain. The pilot radioed the freighter to issue a warning. The Vasyov responded over the VHF. "Don't worry, we will pass clear of each other. We will take care of everything." Relying entirely on his radar screen and ignoring visual confirmation, the freighter's captain did not slow down or alter course. Aboard the Nakhimov, second mate Alexander Chudnovsky watched the freighter bear down on them. He ordered a 10-degree turn to port. By 11:10 p.m., he was shouting over the radio for the freighter to reverse its engines, but the mass of the loaded cargo ship carried too much momentum. At 11:12 p.m., the blunt bow of the Pyotr Vasyov rammed directly into the starboard side of the passenger liner. The bulk carrier was moving at just 5 knots, but the sheer kinetic force was devastating. A basic failure to follow right-of-way rules and an over-reliance on a single radar instrument had turned a slow-speed approach into a fatal, localized strike. This schematic highlights the exact location of the strike. The freighter's bow tore a 900-square-foot hole directly between the engine and boiler rooms. Ocean water rushed into both spaces simultaneously. The math of the 1950s refit immediately sealed the ship's fate. Stripped down to a one-compartment tolerance, the vessel had no reserve buoyancy. The flooding of 2 primary compartments triggered an immediate and severe list to the starboard side. The physical impact instantly severed the ship's electrical grid. The lights went out. The emergency diesel generator kicked on seconds later, offering a brief flash of hope before shorting out permanently 2 minutes into the disaster. The total blackout crippled the bridge. Even if the remaining watertight doors could have contained the water, the automated systems required to close them remotely were now dead. On the decks, passengers and crew fought against decades of deferred maintenance. Lifeboats were practically fused to the ship, their winches painted directly to the deck and the davits frozen solid by marine corrosion. Within minutes, the starboard list exceeded the 20-degree design limit for launching survival craft. Without power, without winches, and standing on a deck tilting sharply toward the water, the crew manually hurled inflatable life rafts into the darkness. The Admiral Nakhimov sank in just 7 minutes. The initial collision created the hole, but the missing bulkheads, the brittle electrical systems, and the corroded deck hardware guaranteed no one would have time to evacuate. 7 minutes after impact, the ship was gone. Within 10 minutes, 64 rescue ships and 20 helicopters arrived, pulling survivors from waters thick with leaking fuel oil. Despite the rapid response, 423 people drowned. Locating the victims required sending elite military divers down 150 feet to the seafloor. The wreck was lying on its side, disorienting the divers who had to navigate pitch-black, 90-degree rotated hallways filled with floating debris. The physical environment actively fought the recovery teams. The heavy oak doors of the passenger cabins absorbed the seawater and swelled shut inside their frames. Divers had to carefully rig underwater explosive charges just to blast the doors open. The operation pushed the limits of human physiology. Lieutenant Commander Yuri Polishchuk died when his oxygen-nitrogen mix ran out while navigating the maze of corridors. Midshipman Sergei Shardakov lost his life when his ventilation hoses became tangled while attempting to pry open a cabin door with a crowbar. With the death toll mounting and the interior of the ship proving too hazardous to navigate, the Soviet government officially halted the salvage operation. Hundreds of cabins were never searched, cementing the hull as a permanent underwater tomb. In 1987, investigators convened in Odessa to establish culpability for the disaster. The inquiry found that both Captain Markov of the Nakhimov and Captain Takhenko of the freighter had grossly violated navigational safety protocols. The court held both men equally responsible, Takhenko for failing to alter course despite his radio assurances, and Markov for leaving the bridge during a close quarters pass. Both captains were sentenced to 15 years in prison. 423 lives were extinguished in the time it takes to boil a pot of water. The speed of the sinking left passengers trapped below decks, navigating in absolute darkness on a floor that was turning into a wall. The Pyotr Vasyov delivered the final blow. But the destruction of the Admiral Nakhimov was the result of a 61-year timeline of accumulated damage. 2 wartime mine strikes, an explosive booby trap, the removal of essential bulkheads, and rusted safety gear had systematically stripped away every possible margin of error, leaving a ship that was entirely incapable of surviving a single mistake.